Hello, we are Bring Change to Mind, and welcome to our first podcast. For those of you who don't know what Bring Change to Mind is, we are a national club dedicated to encouraging dialogue about mental health and to raising awareness, understanding, and empathy.
Today, we will be talking about ways to cope with test anxiety and academic stress. Test anxiety and academic stress are extremely common, and almost everyone will experience them at some point. But it is crucial that we start a discussion and learn some ways to take care of our mental health and well being.
Academic stress and anxiety, it affects like millions and millions of children, in our country. And I found that it is estimated that it affects 10 million, and 16 to 20% have high test anxiety, and 18% have moderate test anxiety. So that is a lot. People don't people may not even realize they have it, and why they do. So I think talking about it is really important.
Yeah, and like a lot of causes for academic stress and test anxiety is well, according to biomedpharmajournal.org, it's excessive assignments, poor time management, and social skills, peer competition, and a lot of other stuff.
Yeah. So I found that there's two main causes. Well, overall. So I found that there's situational causes and mental causes. So for example, some situational causes can be, time test and the pressure that comes with that, and obviously not studying or not understanding the material you're being tested on. Um, and then mental causes can be something like having high expectations for yourself, using your test score as a reflection of your self-worth, and also the fear of letting down your family, yourself.
When we first went into this pandemic, I think a lot of us struggled with the new format of school, and in a lot of cases, the huge load of independent work that was now assigned to us. And I found myself very much struggling to manage my time to get everything done without worrying about, in the middle of an English assignment, for example, I found it really hard to not worry about the fact that there were 20 other things on my list that I was not paying attention to. So that was definitely one of the biggest issues that I had with academic stress when we first went into this. And one great way to manage that ended up working very well for me was to start to create a to-do list that at least roughly outlined a time where I would do each of those 20 things so that my mind wasn't occupied with everything else on my list when I was in the middle of a task. So I would definitely recommend that if you find your mind kind of being bogged down by a to-do list that seems like it'll never be finished.
Yeah, that actually sounds like a really good way to manage your time and studying and all that stuff. I mean, with midterms, freshman, sophomore year, I know we didn't have them this year. Teachers would really make it stressful sounding, oh, this is 20% of your grade, and it was kind of making it the end of the world kind of sounding, and I would really stress out about it. But I guess one of my mechanisms to help me with it was, I mean, one of my teachers suggested to make flashcards and only study a certain amount of time. Cramming it isn't gonna work. So I actually help myself by making flashcards, and I don't know why, but the fact that I went through it repeatedly and I went through a system. If I got it wrong, I put it in a pile. If I got it right, I put it in another pile. After doing that, over the course of a couple days preparing, it kind of eased my mind a bit because I felt more prepared for the test.
Okay, yeah. So for me, I think, and for a lot of people as well, placing too much emphasis on a single test, and having these high expectations, can really get to you, and your mental health. So like I feel like even if you pass or you fail a test, like in the long run, it hurts you in a negative way. So like even if you pass a test, you feel good, you feel whatever, but that's only temporary. And those effects wear off, and like you don't really care about really passing too much. Like you did good, and then you move on and you go back to studying to the next test. And you don't really have a second to breathe and not worry about the next test, assignment, whatever. And but obviously if you fail, you're like, wow, I failed, I did bad. And then you're putting those like negative reflections on ourselves. And I know I did that, I know I still do that. So I think a lot of people equate failing as you're not good enough. And we just need to get out of that mindset and learn that and change the way we think, in order to benefit ourselves and not hurt ourselves.
Yeah, like it's kind of like a hard process, but in the end it'll be worth it. Cause like I know like I feel like most of us maybe probably equate that bad letter grade to like self-worth kind of thing. And yeah, that's not exactly healthy. We need to like get out of that.
Yeah, and I agree, like it's not easy. Like I still struggle with it sometimes. Like I feel like a lot of students go through that. And just learning about it, talking about it, and then um, finding ways to get better is the real goal here.
As an older person, I can tell you that when I was a teenager, I had incredible test anxiety, especially when it came to standardized tests. And I used to work myself up into this frenzy. And then as I got older, I learned to shift my perspective. Instead of thinking about how in that moment, what I got on the test was how I felt about myself, changed to how I did on that test isn't how I feel about myself. It's what I did in that moment. And then I also learned to think to myself, well, ask myself questions like, how much is this going to matter 5 years from now? And obviously, I didn't do great on every test, but, I ended up following, my dream of wanting to become a social worker and, going to school and getting into NYU and finishing that program and working in great places and, having an impact on the world like I wanted to. So when I think back to being a teenager, I'm like, man, did I waste a lot of time in my head thinking about that. So sometimes, even though I can have that perspective now, it's easy for me. You guys can adapt a perspective of how much is this really going to count in 10 years? Is it really going to make or break me?
I completely agree. And I think I've talked a lot about that with you, Mrs. De Los Santos, even just in my short time here in this club. And to circle back to something that Melissa said, she said that we all just never give ourselves time to breathe. And I think it's so important that we acknowledge that one of the most important things when you're managing academic and test anxiety is actually making that time for yourself to breathe, whether it's just to take a couple deep breaths or to play some music for 5 or 10 minutes or do yoga or make some kind of healthy snack for yourself. Everyone needs that ability to just step away for a couple minutes, because science proves that after you've had about 40 minutes of deep focus on academic assignments, that you will start to be on overload, and without a proper 10 to 15 minute break, you will not be able to focus the way you want to, which can add to the anxiety even further rather than just taking a few minutes for yourself.
I was also going to say too, really quickly, like, I'm sure you guys have seen it on TikTok, but it's a pretty like I don't know, it's a pretty like big quote right now, which is just we're on a floating rock. And I feel like it can be interpreted in a few different ways, but I feel like if you just think about that and like put it into perspective, like a lot of the things that we worry about right now, like Mrs. D said, aren't going to matter in a few years. And I don't know. I mean, I'm the same way, like with standardized tests, I always get like freaked out and it's like a multiple choice thing. I don't know if it's because there's so many like answers or whatever, but I know for me, like I like to wear rings and like bracelets and stuff like that. And when I get stressed out, I like touch them and it like kind of brings me back and calms me down. So I feel like just doing like grounding exercises like that can work too.
Yeah.
One thing we've learned is that it's when our mind doesn't know the difference between an actual fear and a perceived fear. So if we have a fear that we're going to fail, or something's going to happen where we're not going to live up to an expectation, that's a fear, and it's actually a very well grounded biological fear that is very, very old. I won't even get into that, but one of the reasons why it's so important to do that grounding exercise, to do that breathing exercise, whatever that is because once we're afraid, our amygdala has switched on and our executive functioning part of the brain switches off. We're not supposed to be computing 2 + 2 and all that other stuff. But you can, by grounding yourself, like you had said, touching things or breathing, all of those things, you could switch the amygdala off a little bit, right? And then turn that frontal lobe of your brain back on, which will allow you to then work through problems. So it's really important before a test and during a test to pick some easy grounding exercises that you can do to help you through that.
Yeah, I know a way like I kind of ground myself when I'm at a test. Like I know when I took the PSAT, like I don't know if it's just me, I hate thinking about breathing because like then I start manually doing it. But like in that situation, it's just kind of like I notice like my heart rate picks up and like I'm nervous and my breathing probably quickens and I have to make sure that, like once I start breathing, like deep breathing, I guess, like everything just starts to calm down more and I'm able to like go through with the test.
Yeah, and going back to that, we're just on like a floating rock quote. I feel like for me, especially now during this pandemic, I've definitely sort of lived by that quote. And for some reason, I've just gained, while I still struggle with like, anxiety, test anxiety, whatever, I feel like I've learned more now that, not every test is going to make or break your life, it's not going to prevent you from going to college. It's not going to, be so detrimental. And for some reason, I've learned that more now, maybe just, because I had more time to think or, things like that. But I've definitely tried to do that like every day and just think about it.
Yeah, going off what Melissa said, I think it's also really important to acknowledge that, let's say you determine one test will impact you in a few years. And according to that floating rock quote, it is important. I think I'm someone who has very lofty goals for myself. And I think I talk too often about the fact that Cornell is my dream school. And I've talked to friends and family about the fact that I'm a bit stressed about my SAT score and getting that up. And one time my mom actually just looked at me when I was really stressed out and she said, if Cornell won't accept you as a holistic person because you do not have a 1500 on the SAT, is it really the right place for you? Do you really want to go there? So I think even with especially these huge tests like the SAT, the ACT, midterms, finals, the really big ones, it's really important to remember that you need to have grace with yourself. And anyone who isn't willing to have grace with you, do you really want to be around that person or around that organization? I definitely have struggled with that one, and I think it's a great thing to keep in mind.
I think also too, like I'm like in the same boat with like SATs. Like I know I'm taking mine next month and I'm doing like prep and everything and just getting stressed out. But like you also have to remember that there's never going to be like no colleges that want you. Like you're always going to be able to find a school that works for you, and like you're always going to have other options. Like even if you were to do kind of bad on it or you're not getting the score that you want, like it's not the end of the world. Yes, it's still important, and like depending on what goals you have, I feel like that'll, change a little bit. But there's always going to be some school that wants you. And even if it's not like an Ivy or like the original, school that you wanted, like you're always going to have another option. So I feel like that's important to remember too.
I agree with you. And I think like we don't stress enough that there are multiple paths to go where you want to go. I mean, I don't mean to go off on a tangent about college, but I think it's really important that especially juniors that are struggling through this pandemic, or even sophomores who have had their grades slip a little bit. I mean, there are multiple routes. If you decide that you want to go to Harvard or USC, there are actually a lot of people that go to community college for a year or go to state school for a year, and they work to do well and make themselves stand out, and they transfer and graduate from those schools. So I feel like we genuinely don't talk about the fact that you don't always have to get there from being a senior in high school. So if you mess up your SAT, or online learning has been so difficult for you and you've been struggling with test anxiety, there's always a way to get past that.
Do you guys ever play like the five senses game during a test or before a test? A couple of years ago, I had a student come in who was struggling with taking tests and needed to get his scores up so that he can get into a specific college. And so we did a little experiment. I gave him 3 things to do before his tests, and we tracked to see if his test scores went up or would go up if he practiced these grounding techniques. And lo and behold, it worked. And I thought that was like the coolest thing ever. But those 3 things were, one was square breathing, which is real simple to do. You breathe into the count of 4, you hold your breath to the count of 4, and you breathe out to the count of 4. And you do that 4 times, because there's 4 parts to it, right? The second thing is the naming the colors game. So what you do is you start anywhere in a room that you're in, and you start in one corner, and you silently, obviously, because you're sitting in a group full of people, and you start naming colors out loud, they're going to be like, what are you doing? But you go around and you start naming all of the colors that you see. And it doesn't matter if you're repeating colors or what have you, right? But you go around and you're naming those colors, right? And then the last thing is the 5 senses game. So you have 5 senses, right? So for each sense, you do something. So it's, you look around, you name 5 things that you can see. You name 4 things that you can feel, whether it's your hair, your clothes, the chair, the floor. 3 things that you can hear, which can include something like your breathing, if it's very quiet in the room. 2 things that you smell. And if you can't smell anything, you can name, or 2 things that you like to smell, right? Your 2 favorite smells, and 1 thing that you taste. And so those are three simple things that you can do silently. No one's going to know that you're doing that. And when you do that, like we said earlier, you're turning that amygdala switch off, and you're grounding yourself in the present moment. So your mind isn't swirling about, what if I don't do well? Did I forget everything? All of those things, right? And if you have to do it a couple of times, then you do it a couple of times. So for test taking, doing a couple of those things can be really, really helpful. And it just takes a couple of seconds. So I thought that was pretty interesting to find out that there was, definitely. And I loved getting, the emails, have this grade now in this class, and and it was pretty cool. And there's a ton of things that you guys can do, ton of little tricks that are out there. And our SEL page on our website has a lot of different things that you can try and use.
Yeah. Like even like those ways to deal with it, I feel like it's not just test anxiety that you can use this for. You can use this for any time you're feeling stressed, anytime you're going through something that you just need to help you go through it.
There's lots of different ways you can trick your body into thinking that you're okay. I don't know if has any of you guys ever find that when you're super anxious, you get dry mouth?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Because your body is pulling away all of that mucus to other parts of your body to get ready to run and jump and hide and do all that stuff. So one of the other things that you could do, believe it or not, is bring saliva into your mouth, and that shuts off that autonomic nervous system and says, oh, well, if I've got moisture in my mouth, I must be okay. So there's all sorts of little tricks that we can do, when we're anxious. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I feel like that actually does something, because I feel like when I drink water, when I'm feeling this way or something, I feel like it definitely does help for some reason. Like nice ice cold water, it just is so much better. And I also just slow my breath and try to maintain calmness in some way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, think about it. If you're running away from a bear, you're not stopping by a stream and drinking some water, right? But your body knows that if you're drinking water, well, I must be okay, right? I must be doing all right if I'm able to stop and drink some water.
Thank you so much to our listeners for tuning in, and make sure to tune in next time for further discussions about mental health. If you are interested in joining Bring Change to Mind, email Mrs. De Los Santos or Miss Kylie.